Today, what I want to do is I want to talk about maximizing your own productivity as a leader, because your people will need to see you do this in order to replicate the behavior, to really see what that looks like and for it to become their own culture and their own way of behavior, right? They need to see you model and this attitude of embracing efficiency in order to display that as a trait in their own lives. I want to talk about really how to maximize profitability in your business. And not just that, but really start with a very fundamental part, a really important part. And that's maximizing your own personal productivity. And this is an important topic because as a leader, right? As a leader, you are the example. Okay. You're the example as a leader of your company, meaning that you cannot expect your team member to put in all their effort, right? To put in their own best attempts at efficiency if you're not even willing to do that for your own cause, right? How can you expect someone else to do that, right? If you're not dedicated to your own business, if you're not dedicated to your own cause, you cannot expect somebody else to do that, right? Because your team is going to follow your lead, right? They're going to follow your lead. They're going to follow your attitude. They're going to pick up on your energy, right? And what's going to happen is your team is going to draft off of you, right? Draft. And if you've never heard that term draft, where that comes from is, there's a term that we use in biking and the word is drafting. And if you've ever driven by a bunch of cyclists, you notice that they ride in pretty much a straight line. It's like one after another. And it's pretty like this perfect straight line. And the reason why they're riding in a straight line is because they're drafting off the wind. They're drafting off the wind of the cyclist that's in front of them. So that cyclist in front of them is actually pulling that person behind them in there. So it's a little bit easier to pedal. You can use less energy to maintain the same speed, right? And so, it really helps when someone's in front of you because one, they block the wind and they pull you in. So you're able to really cycle more efficiently. Now, the one that's in front, because there's always somebody in the front, right? That person's going to carry the burden, right? They're going to carry the most burden because they don't have anybody to draft off of, right? They're literally creating that pull. They're blocking all that initial wind and they're creating the pull for everybody behind them. And that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what we do as leaders. We create the wind that pulls in the others that are behind us, right? Our team is a reflection of ourselves. And when you step into the role of an entrepreneur, right, what happens is you are automatically stepping into that role of leadership, whether you were prepared to do it or not. Literally, you are a leader the day that you step into that role of entrepreneurship. And as a leader, you're going to lead, right? You're going to lead. If you guys know me, I love watching those old war movies, right? And who isn't a fan of a great war movie like Saving Private Ryan, right? And one of the things that you'll notice in a war movie is, the leader's not sitting in the back, right? They're not sitting in the back eating popcorn, watching everybody else, go to war, right? That's not a good leader, right? Nobody's going to follow that person. That leader is not hiding out when everybody's going to war. But what you're going to see in a good leader, right? That good leader, he's actually leading the pack from the front. He's in the front line. When they're doing that war cry, that leader is running out in front of them. He's charging on the front line. And he's doing this because he knows that as a leader, he has to set the pace, right? He has to set the pace. If this leader doesn't show courage, right, he doesn't have the right to expect his troop to display the same extreme courage that it takes to go to war, right? And that leader is not willing to give up his life, right? He has no right to demand that his troop do the same, right? And so that leader has to really set the example. He has to set the precedent. And so when it's time to charge, when it's time to charge that enemy line, that leader is taking the charge, right? He is literally leading the charge. And as a business owner, if you want to lead a powerful team, okay, if you want to lead a powerful team, you must set the example. And you must not only set the example in terms of the strategy for your team, but you also have to set the direction. You have to set the pace of your team. And you do this by setting the example. Many entrepreneurs tell me, they tell me things like they want to increase productivity in their team, right? They want their people to do more in the same set amount of time, right? And they want to see productivity go high because they realize that the higher the productivity is, the higher we can get things done in the same amount of time, the more profits go up, right? It's simple mathematics. The more we can get done, the same amount of resources that are required, the more profits are going to go up. These same entrepreneurs tell me, they want their team to work smarter, right? They tell me that they want their team to be more innovative. They tell me that they want their team to do more with less. You've heard it all. You probably have thought some of the same thoughts, right? Yet it's interesting because a lot of times when I look at their own lives, actually sometimes do walkthroughs of their businesses, right? And look at their operations, I wonder if these leaders are actually maximizing their own personal time and efforts. For example, when I do a walkthrough, sometimes I'll see processes that are antiquated, or see them retain these poor performers that are not operating at their best instead of replacing them with better talent, right? Today, what I want to do is I want to talk about maximizing your own productivity as a leader, because your people will need to see you do this, because they need to see you do this as a leader, because they need to see it in order to replicate the behavior, to really see what that looks like, and for it to become their own culture and their own way of behavior, right? They need to see you model and this attitude of embracing efficiency in order to display that as a trait in their own lives. And so today we're going to talk about maximizing your own productivity, because that is the first pillar of creating an efficient team and an efficient organization, right? Is maximizing your own. Being a leader, being the example is where it all starts. To start with maximizing your productivity as a leader, it's important, first of all, to understand the overall goal of the organization. Okay, so understanding the overall goal. And what I mean by this is, what does winning really look like for your organization? What does winning look like? What do I want my organization to look like at the end of the day? And I know in Profit First, one of the big criteria that we look at is optimizing efficiency, right? And one way that we can tell if we're doing it, that is by looking at certain ratios, right? We're looking at your revenue to your labor cost ratio. And we like to see that each employee is at least generating $150,000 in annual revenue. So one employee should at least be generating $150,000, or if you've got a more expensive type of labor situation, a 3x on cost, right? And so you can see, in order to achieve those numbers, those ratios, efficiency is important, right? Because you're not going to get those ratios if you're not efficient, right? If you're not strategic. And then, does winning in your organization, when you think about winning in your organization, what does that look like from an interaction standpoint? Do you want an organization where your employees are constantly coming to you, asking you for direction, asking you for your opinion, asking you what to do, or asking you, hey, boss, what do I do next? Or do you want an organization like I want, which is more of an independent thinker organization, where my team comes to me with solutions, where they go, hey, Susanne, can you just pick one? Or better yet, they can even make decisions in my absence, right? That's the type of organization that I like to run, right? Is where I empower people to make their own decisions. But this step is really important, because it's important because you have to formulate healthy boundaries for yourself as a leader, right? And to create those boundaries, you have to understand what is acceptable, what is it that you want, what is the goal that we're getting to, in order to create those boundaries to make those things happen. And as a leader, you have to protect your time, right? You have to protect your time. And as a leader, you only want to be assigned responsibilities that only you can do as a leader, right? You don't want to be doing the tasks that everybody else in the company can be doing, right? You want to be doing the tasks that only you as a leader can do. Everything else can be delegated. And so when determining the overall outlook of the organization, you have to decide, if I want this to be true, if I want my company to look like this, right? What must happen for that to be true? Don't you guys love Boolean logic? Do you guys remember Boolean logic? I love it when math gets to the point there are no more numbers, right? It's all about understanding relationships. So we're going to embrace some Boolean logic here, right? And go, what must be true for this to be true? For me to get that ideal situation of getting that 3x on labor, 4x on labor, or that, having employees that come to me for ideas versus what to do, what must happen for that to be true? And the next step is really understanding what must be done, right? That only you can do, right? So after you know what the environment that you want, what is it that only you can do that is needed to get this agenda done? What is it that's important that really drives the needle forward that can't be done by anybody else in the organization? And so all these things, what's necessary to move the organization forward that only you can do, okay? And for me, some of these things that only I can do in my organization, I'll give you guys an example, is showing up and speaking about what we're doing, right? That's the role that's best suited for me there, and it won't always be, eventually we'll have other people that can do that. But for now, that's my role, showing up and saying, this is what we are doing right now. This is what we're doing in our organization. This is the strategic direction. That's my role right now, right? And the other thing that only I can do at this particular point is a certain type of content creation, right? I don't do all of my content, but for very unique spends, and that is the voice, the brand is my voice, right? In many ways. So that content creation is still a critical role for me. And so I need to focus on creating content that's going to really be powerful in order to move the needle forward. Another one of my roles includes analyzing current processes, right? I have to analyze current processes and I need to formulate strategic direction, right? And I'm best suited for this part of my company because I understand every component of the company, right? I understand the company from top down. I understand how the spokes turn and how they interact with each other, right? In a way that nobody else does at this point. And so that strategic analysis is one of my roles. I also need to identify what is working and I need to terminate what is not working, right? For me, how I do that is I'm reviewing my KPIs, my key performance indicators. And based upon this review of KPIs, I'm creating strategy and I'm determining, where are we going with this? I'm observing what is working and I'm also actively course correcting constantly, right? I'm having those critical conversations when things aren't working, when things are not going in the right direction. And although I could delegate the creation of some of these reports, right? An admin can easily do those things for me. That analysis and that direction and making those decisions from a strategic standpoint, that requires my eyes and my attention, right? And so those are things that can only be assigned to me. And so my question for you is, what are the tasks that only you can do that's required to move the company forward in a direction that is winning for you, right? What are those things? What are those key responsibilities that only you can do that's going to move that needle forward? And then these are the items I want you to focus on. These are your to-dos on your to-do list, right? And these tasks are going to change over time, right? What you're doing today isn't necessarily going to be what you're going to be doing in 5 years from now. As you develop more concrete processes, as your organization scales, you're going to be able to hire middle managers or maybe even executive tier leaders that you're going to be able to delegate some of these to. But today, what are the things that only you can do that's required to move that needle forward? Next thing that you want to consider is what avenue or tech will you use to keep you focused and ensure that you're actually accomplishing these goals? So what avenue or tech that's needed? For me, it's my Outlook calendar. Okay. My Outlook calendar, that is my weapon of choice. And I like Outlook because it's a cloud-based calendar, right? It can be updated and when it's updated, it can be assessed by multiple people on an as-needed basis, right? And I've heard of leaders using Google calendars and those work pretty well for them. But I think it's important that whatever you use, whatever calendar that you use, it needs to be a cloud-based calendar. And when it changes, the multiple people who need to assess it, those assistants, they're going to be able to receive those updates as well and be able to schedule that. So it's a living, moving document that people can access and use. And I figured out a while ago that what gets documented in the calendar has a very high probability of getting done. They say when you document your goals, you actually increase the likelihood of achieving it. The same with the calendar. When you document those calendar items, the likelihood of it going up goes up even more. And if you're like me and you're blessed with multiple assistants, right, you may find that your calendar easily becomes filled with other people's agendas, right? Who hasn't woken up one day and said, oh my gosh, all this is on my calendar, but if I had done my own calendar, this is definitely not how I would have booked my day, right? Who's been in that situation? And what you have to do is be careful because, you have to think about how am I going to protect my time, right? How do I protect my time? Because you don't want to wake up one day and your day is spent really forwarding someone else's agenda that's not in line with your priorities. And so the question is, how do you preserve those special moments of white space, that time that you can do that deep thinking so that you can really concentrate and get things done? And this white space, it has to be scheduled in your calendar, right? It has to be protected because the truth is we all need time to concentrate. You cannot be strategic if you don't have a second in a day to breathe. Okay. And so we all need that strategic white space in your calendar. And for me, it starts with rules. And I'm not talking about calendar rules, although they're useful, right? I'm talking about creating boundaries with your calendar, right? Because your calendar should create boundaries. Your calendar should protect your time. And your calendar should make it so that the things that are reflected in your calendar, the things that are noted on your calendar should be reflections of your priorities, meaning that it's moving you forward to winning in your business and in your life. I'll be honest with you, if I left my time up to my assistants, if I left every second of my day booked, if I let my assistants control my calendar without any rules, I would have every second of my day booked with meetings. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'd have a life where there were no lunch breaks. I'd have a day even worse without any bathroom breaks. And I admit, they have done that to me before. And because the calendar didn't have any rules, right? Because my calendar at the time didn't have any rules, and so, my life those days did not allowed me to be respected as a person of even being able to take lunch breaks or even restroom breaks. And the reason why is these assistants, they literally were booking the calendar like a mathematical formula. They saw an open spot, you needed a meeting, that's where you went. It didn't matter if it was lunchtime, right? It didn't matter if it was back to back with another meeting. And so my question for you is there space? If someone is asking for a meeting, what are the rules that you're putting into place for that, right? Because the reality is you have to have rules because those rules are boundaries, right? And those rules protect, how you're going to be able to live your life daily, how you're going to be able to reach your priorities. And so I've created written calendar rules, and these rules are specifically for my assistant, right? And these rules say, when there's an open spot and it's on these days, you are welcome to book meetings, just book 10 minutes, give me a 10-minute space between meetings, right? If anything runs over. I even book out a lunch place there. And where it's not open, where it's not available, right? This is restricted time now. This is restricted time where I'm able to focus on my priorities like writing, content creation, recordings, etc. I'm blocking space for the podcast interviews. And if that time is blocked off, right? The rule is no other event can be booked on top of it. Okay. And yes, I've had assistants that have tried to schedule on top of block time, and they have tried to make decisions for me like, oh, she doesn't really need that. And again, as an entrepreneur, we have to be fierce about protecting our time, right? We have to enforce these boundaries, right? Otherwise, we're going to live lives that are not incongruent with our purpose, right? So that calendar space, those rules, those written rules, like you can only book on certain days, right? If you have meetings like Tuesday through Thursday, you have to create those written rules so your assistants know if you need 10-minute space between those, you have to convey that too in those written rules. And if that time is booked for meeting space, right, or for a white space, right, that meetings need to be declined. If it's booked for white space, meetings have to be declined. And they're only allowed to schedule during those openings that are available on the calendars. And again, if you don't enforce these boundaries, you'll find that your life literally becomes somebody else's agenda and it's not fun. It definitely happened to me. Now, next is you want to book vacations on your calendar. Yes, book vacations. And book them before you have anything else scheduled so that time is available. So like I'm booking vacation through next year right now. And I've even booked, like I said before, my lunch breaks on my calendar. This is the time I take lunch. I'm booking it in there. And so when assistants are looking at the calendar, they're looking at it again like a mathematical standpoint. And so like literally they were booking lunches for meetings is what they were doing. So and again, they're looking at it from a mathematical standpoint. They're not impacted if you don't get to have lunch that day. They're not impacted if you don't get to do a restroom break, right? Your assistant is not feeling the consequence. So you have to schedule that lunch on the calendar. You have to create rules where there's a 10-minute buffer between each meeting. Otherwise, it won't happen. But again, that calendar is there to protect your time and make sure your priorities are followed through. And the next step, and this is the part that nobody ever wants to hear, okay? You have to be disciplined. You have to be disciplined. You have to exercise self-discipline. Everyone's looking for that fast weight loss plan. They're looking for the GOLO or the $1,000 Ozempic. But the truth is, the reason why that people don't achieve goals is usually because they don't have the discipline to do the everyday work, right? They don't have the discipline to do that non-glamorous stuff, to do that daily grind, to have those crucial conversations, to implement those boundaries. Right. And if you want to be fit and you want to look great, you got to exercise and eat right. Right. There's no shortcuts. And the reality is, yes, you can do some temporary things like we talked about the Golo, the Ozempic, but they don't work long term if you don't do the basic things. And the basic things are the non-glamorous eating right and exercising. And if you want to be successful in business and have a business constantly moving forward, you have to do the work, right? You have to be reviewing your budget. You have to review your KPIs to make sure that you're moving in the right direction. You have to lead the new initiatives. So if you got a new initiative, something that you're bringing to market, a new idea, right? You can put that out to your assistants, but the reality is it won't happen, right? You have to have crucial conversations constantly to get that done. That means you have to have the follow-up conversation points. You have to have those checkpoints that are happening throughout the project to make sure things are progressing. And you may have to talk to them if it's not. You have to do the work. There are no shortcuts. And what the calendar says, is when it's in that calendar, it means that you have to do it, right? You have to do what's in the calendar. You have to do it. There is no success pill. That time's allowed it. You got to do the work for whatever is scheduled. And when your team sees you delivering on your goals, when the team sees that you're doing the work, that you are showing up, that you're doing the repetitive things that nobody likes to do, those follow-ups, right? They start to understand that they exist in a culture where we deliver, right? We deliver on the things that we say we're going to deliver on. And it's not acceptable to not deliver, right? It's not acceptable to not finish the project that you started, to not carry it through with excellence. And when your team sees you protecting your time, right? And protecting your time and your calendar, and they see that you're showing that self-discipline, you're showing them that these are your expectations, that they protect their time also. And this boundaries, right? This way of being, of protecting our time and being efficient, that becomes the culture of your company. And leaders lead, and they lead by being the example. We lead out front, and as leaders, we charge the battle line, right? We charge the battle line. We lead, we set the example, we set the pace. And I hope that today was extremely helpful for you guys. Thanks for hanging out with me today. And until next time.